Okay, everybody, so for our last group of images, we are going to start out with Christina's photographs, and we've got her artist statement right here. Hopefully, you will all have a chance to give it a quick read. I like the format of it here, Christina. Good length. I think it speaks very much to your involvement with the water, with these creatures that are underneath the water, why these things are important to you. And I think as I've been asking everybody to do, you tease it. You don't literally describe it, you tease it, which is really perfect for me. So excellent artist statement. Uh, Great start here, and certainly your writing in terms of your work is outstanding. So let's talk about the imagery a second. And I've got to caveat this. You and I have been having sort of a little discussion over email about the images and talking about taking stuff underwater. But for everybody, I think it's important to caveat that what Christine is doing here is really, really difficult and maybe not necessarily something that is ideal for an introductory level project. Shooting stuff underwater is extremely challenging. There's not a lot of light, and the light that does come through is oftentimes unusual because it's either artificial light from an aquarium or it's light out actually in the ocean that has almost all the light has been filtered to be blue because within the very first few feet of water, basically all the red gets filtered out. So we don't see any reds when we see underwater images. That is unless artificial lighting has been brought into play, which certainly is the case with probably 90% of the imagery that you see in National Geographic. I have to say that growing up, one of my inspirations, because I've always loved scuba diving and snorkeling and being in the water, was a National Geographic photographer named David Duboulet. And here are a bunch of his images. And an image like this almost assuredly was taken with a camera that had an artificial lighting set up on it that help reveal some of the colors that are in this fish that we normally wouldn't see with just consumer level equipment. Again, more of his stuff. Uh, in many ways, this image and this image kind of feel like some of the stuff that you were trying to do in your aquarium imagery. And again, just I'm showing you this to point out more so than anything that it does take a long time, and again, another one that I think would fall in line with maybe some of the stuff that you were trying to do. Uh, it's tough to do. It really, really is challenging to do. So it's certainly just something that you're going to have to spend a lot of time practicing and taking a lot of photographs doing. And I don't want to discourage you at all in what we say about your current images. And by the way, I also here's a link to a really great interview with David Duboulet, and especially he talks a lot about sort of the process and the equipment that's used in this, so you get a feel for again really the complexity of what's involved here. So back to your images here. So we're going to acknowledge right away that the lighting is not going to be super great in these images, and which is probably going to make your images have to be shot with a slower shutter setting, or at least not an ideal shutter setting, and probably an ISO that's going to be really high, which is going to add a lot of noise to our images. And I'm sorry, and also you're shooting through glass, which is aquarium glass, which might not be as optically pure as our glass that is in a DSLR camera lens. So all of these things are big challenges that you have to overcome here. So really like this image of the turtle here. I think for me, maybe the turtle is a little bit more interesting than anything else in the photograph. And I probably would have opted to crop out this this little fish that's swimming in the foreground here, because it almost feels, especially because it's so out of focus, it almost feels like a little bit of a distraction. And I think what you got here with the turtle's face, I think is pretty interesting in and of itself. Maybe the turtle's face and its fins. Gosh, in a perfect world, I wish I didn't have this little plant. I'm sorry, I'm gonna just try and highlight it for you here and see if we can do a quick content aware fill on this. Let's see if we can shoot. And you know, it's not perfect here, but you can see how once we get rid of that image even looks that much better. And again, recognizing here that it's not perfect what I did by any means, but you know, certainly having that distraction not there, I think definitely adds to that photograph a little bit. Second image, like this reminds me of the Dubélé shots where, you know, he's got half of the images above water and half of the images below water. You know, it looks like your water here is probably a little bit on the murky side, so you don't have crystal clear Caribbean waters. So I definitely understand how underneath here it might be a little bit blurry and a little challenging to see what you got going on there. I probably would have gone in and do a little bit of post-production work and, you know, done some, you know, playing around in Photoshop that brings out a little bit more of the details in the underside of the puffin to help us understand what is going on in here. And I actually, you know, these puffin are such interesting looking birds. I'm just wondering why you cropped it right here rather than actually including some of its head. I just wonder if that perhaps might have been an interesting component to include in there. You know, your third image I like a lot in the sense that we've got, you know, really sharp focus, I think more so than the other images, and probably because we don't have a super lot of movement going on here, that helps it not to look quite as blurry, and it looks like the water's a little bit clearer in here. So I think all in all this image is really compelling, really interesting, and it is a really good start as far as getting yourself involved and taking these images and learning through some of your successes and some of the stuff that doesn't necessarily work out as well. You know, again, taking on some images that might be a little bit easier. I love the fact that this shot is nice and clear. Again, focused very much on this fish. Doesn't have the distractions of, you know, some of the plants that might be growing in there, and working to kind of blur the actual things. I might just opt for a little bit of modifications here in trying to figure out a way that I really can get this fish as visible as possible, which, you know, I think we're going a little bit in this direction. I wonder if you're shooting in camera raw, if you couldn't work with this a little bit too to sort of bring out a little bit more of the fish. Now, I recognize again that in our discussions you talked about sort of one of the things that you wanted to show was sort of the blurriness, and, you know, it's almost mysterious underwater, and if that's what you're going for, I think you've got it here to a certain degree. I think probably one of your best images of the group in terms of clarity, composition, simplicity of the frame, focus, everything looks really good here. Again, I'm gonna just tweak your image a little bit. Now that frog or lizard or whatever that thing is in there is now really bright and really good. You know, ISO of 200, exposure of 180, f-stop of 6.3, all those things are really perfect. And you see, we can adjust that exposure a little bit as long as we've got really good focus in there. And the ISO is so low here that you really don't have to worry about once we start adjusting like we did in this one. Once we made the adjustments, we've got a lot of noise then to contend with, which is not the case in this image. Cool shot here. I really love this. Love the simplicity of the frame. We very much can tell that this guy here is a sea lion, and again, maybe just adjusting that a little bit, tweaking it in post-production. And these interesting sort of finger-like coral or whatever the creature is. Again, I'm probably more apt to just do a little bit of adjusting there in post-production. And last shot, super interesting structure in this fish. Lots of pattern in the darks and the lights there, all of which I like a lot. So good finale to it all. So all in all, Christina, good job here. I know as I talk about these images, I probably sound a little bit more critical or a little bit negative, and I don't at all intend for it to come off that way. I just really want to help you sort of push your abilities as a photographer. I get the sense that you, being in the animal behavior program, that you're going to be doing a lot of animal photography, and this kind of work is something that's probably going to be really personally gratifying to you. So I just want to help you improve your skills in there and get better at this. So for what it's worth, that's really where I'm coming from in this whole thing. So good job with this again. Look forward to seeing you continue to get better at this, continue to work at this craft, and hopefully in the end you are really doing images that ultimately are personally pleasing for you, which is the goal of all of this. So keep working at it, and certainly if you have any questions as you continue to try photography in this underwater arena, give a buzz or give a shout or shoot me an email, and I will definitely try to help you out in any way I can. So good job with this. So next up I have Shira's images, and Shira is doing her project on service dogs. And we have her artist statement right here. So probably right off the bat, if you've been listening to all of these critiques, you would know right away that I'm not a super big fan of having individual photographs described. Rather, we're looking for sort of a bigger overall reflection about the project. So Shira, in this instance, I'm probably more apt to direct you towards doing something like that. Although, honestly, I have to say, like, this is great what you have to say about Ellie, and I think this is really an important part of the story. So I don't know if there's a way you could weave all of these together in a certain way that makes it sort of one individual paragraph or series of paragraphs. And again, we don't necessarily need to have the exposures in here, although again, that's great for me to know. It helps me diagnose any problems in there, and it just gives me a good sense that, okay, you know what you're doing. You've looked at these things enough that you're memorizing them, or at least writing them down, and that's a really critical part of the learning experience. So that is just what I think about the artist statement as we get going here. Just wanted to call up the second page of your titles. So again, encourage everybody to give that a look. So Shira, first shot here, we did talk about this in the last feedback. I think it's a great shot, perfect introductory opening shot. The dog's eyes certainly are a very critical part of this uh, type of imagery. And you've also got the details here, the American flag, the harness, and the uniform or coat that the dog wears. So nice introductory shot, good way to start things off, and certainly begins to tell a story about who these dogs are and what they do. Where do we got them? Where we look for number 2 here? Sorry. Second image, great shot. I mean, we talked again last uh, assignment about trying to clean up your backgrounds and simplify them and frame things in a much more organized manner. And I think you've done this here. You know, maybe the background isn't necessarily simplified, but what you have done here is arranged it in a much more straightforward way where our eye really goes to the dog here, and then it sort of gently goes to the background and works through the veteran that is hanging out back there. So the organization of the frame is really something that we're going to find is going to be super important here. And when you have sort of details in corners or in edges of the frame that really grab our eye or grab our attention away from the main subject, it's not going to work. But in this instance, you've got this set up perfectly. There's really nothing over here that draws my eye over or captures my interest. So the dog itself really, the dog and the vet behind him are really the things that my eye is drawn to. Great detail shot. We can see the playfulness of the dog. I love the lighting here. The side lighting is really emphasizing the texture in the dog and even sort of the character of the skin of the vet here. So just a beautiful, beautiful shot, and probably one of my favorite shots of the whole body of work. Another, again, detail shot, says a little bit about the dogs, and it's one of those types of shots that I can almost hear, the dog sort of sniffing as he's sort of approaching somebody to see if he or she can recognize who it is. So very visually tactile photo, but I think in a strange way it's kind of auditory too. So really like that a lot. Really beautiful shot. And similar dog that we had from the first image. Your dog here, the one thing about, no, actually I take it back. I was going to say the dog's eyes were a little bit out of focus, but I think the dog's eyes are in focus here. I guess what kind of threw me off was sort of the stitching in his shorts was also in sharp focus, and maybe my eye was going there a little bit. Perhaps as a thought, we just come in a little bit tighter, maybe something like this, and then the image just becomes a little bit more compelling. Sorry about that. And really neat silhouette shot with the beautiful sort of little thread or little tunnel of light just falling on her face there. Beautiful, beautiful image. Again, great use of backlighting here. Our silhouette of both the person and the dog are very distinct and clear. Really love that a lot. Looks like you went to black and white on this image. Maybe? Let me just check your image mode. If you're still in color, maybe you desaturated or got rid of the colors in there. I'm wondering if having some of the color in here might add to the photograph, especially because all of your other images are in color. Maybe something to consider. Ultimately, maybe it doesn't work, but we're seeing both side by side. Love this shot, especially having that little pop of color in there. I think really adds to it and kind of softens the dog a little bit. There's always the stigma around black dogs and how they're kind of perceived as being more aggressive than other ones. So having a little bit of that pink in there, again, almost softens it up a little bit and maybe even humanizes this dog a little bit. But love how, the one interesting thing is his or her ears are sort of in a downward position as opposed to an upward position, which again sometimes can be sort of perceived as threatening. You saw I cropped in, pulled in a little bit on this image. I think that might help that a little bit, just getting him centered a little bit more. And then awesome way to finish it out, sort of this playful interaction between the owner and the dog. Super shot. I love this little detail in the background where we just talk about in memory of. So I think it also might speak to some of the fallen soldiers, and just a really, really beautiful image and beautiful way to wrap it all up. Again, even see like the name of the dog here. All of these little details all sort of work together to make this a really powerful, interesting image. So great job. Love the refinements that you made at the in the last week to this project, and it really pulled together perfectly. So great job with this. Great subject matter that you took on, and I just think you handled it really, really well. So big kudos to you, and look forward to hopefully meeting you down the road here, and hopefully you'll continue taking pictures throughout your career. And next up we have Kaz's photos, and we begin with his artist statement, which I think is really, really beautifully done. One of the best ones of the group here that we've looked at for this class. Very poetic. It's kind of ironic that it sounds like he mentions in here, I've signed up to be a writer, so clearly comfortable with the written word and sort of choosing words in a very careful manner to be very evocative, but also speak to how this project is very personal for him. And I love this part of it right at the end. It's almost like the invitation to come in and look at the images. Beauty is all around us. We must take the time to look. So he's basically saying, come on in and look at my view of what beauty in this world is. So start out introductory shot, little shot of some falling water. These type of shots are always difficult, especially on sunny days, because you get kind of these really bright highlight areas that wash out some of the detail in the water here. And if we look at our histogram, I feel like some of our details in the whites are getting lost. So perhaps, and this again is probably done better in camera raw than it is with the JPEGs, but you can see how I'm bringing in a little bit more of those details there, so it doesn't look quite as washed out as it originally did here. Second image, I really love this shot, sort of having the flowers in focus while we've got sort of almost like this dreamlike blur with the shallow depth of field in the foreground that very much frames it and draws our eye right to it. Love how you've kind of put this in that area of the rule of thirds, really using a lot of negative space to draw the viewer's eye over to that on the left-hand part of the frame. Very well done. And it's funny, almost the same composition set up with the subject up in that rule of thirds area on the left-hand side of the frame, have a lot of out of focus area, or the word that we use is bokeh, a lot of bokeh in the photograph here. And again, it draws our eye very much to these beautiful berries and the patterns and shapes and all the intricate details within all of these leaves in this shot. So two very strong images, both from an aesthetic perspective and also from a technical perspective, using that shallow depth of field to direct the viewer throughout the frame. And again, third image, very similar to the previous two. This is good because what I'm trying to do is to motivate you or inspire or direct all of you to kind of get images that have sort of the same look and feel with different subject matters, because obviously what that is going to say to me is that you can repeat the similar technique over and over again, and when you are able to repeat these techniques over and over again, it means that you understand them and can apply them to different situations. So you've done that with great sophistication here in these three shots. So that certainly says to me that you understand the camera, you understand compositional rules and compositional setups in photographs, and you have mastered these skills. The next image is kind of interesting in that it feels a teeny bit out of place because it is so dark, almost foreboding, and it kind of contrasts a little bit, not a little bit actually, a lot with the previous three, actually the previous four images that were very sort of bright and punchy. I'm almost wondering, you see here I lightened up this image and probably even lighten it up a little bit more. And when you do that, now all of a sudden our attention is brought to sort of these colorful elements within the rocks, and the image is much more than about these natural elements here, as opposed to being about, it feels more like a textural image, and very and one that's almost very dark and, you know, almost like Lord of the Rings-esque to me. And similarly, I like this shot, and I think it's much more in line with the style that you've demonstrated throughout the majority of the project. I just would maybe brighten it up a teeny bit because it did look a little bit on the dark side to me there. And same way again with this image, I think stylistically using that bokeh effect, using the compositional scheme with having one thing off to one side or the other, lots of negative space in the image, all of that's present. I just feel like, again, our image is maybe a little bit too dark, and lightening that image up a little bit certainly does the trick here. And last but not least, a beautiful closing image with that warm sunsetting light in the background and the silhouetted flowers or silhouetted buds in the foreground. You know, again, maybe a little bit different than some of the other images that you have here, but all in all, I think that it is a beautiful way to finish it with sort of like the setting sun as sort of a metaphor for sort of this image coming to a conclusion, just like a day is coming to a conclusion. So I do like it from that perspective. And I almost wonder, you know, as I go through this project now, I see sort of like the evolution of bright going to darker, to going to darker, to darker, ultimately going to where the sun is going down here. So, you know, maybe in terms of narrative, maybe that does speak to, you know, from sunrise to sunset in the course of the project, and that probably makes a little bit of sense to me. So I wonder if that was intentional, and if it was, really good job on your part. And if it wasn't, you know, still I think really, really solid project here. In many ways, I think it works. Just a couple little exposure tweaks here I think would help it out, but all in all, really good project and a very good artist statement to begin with. So good job, and hope you get a chance to enjoy the natural beauty of the world here for the last month here of summer. So take care. Okay, to finish things up for the semester, we have Sullivan's photographs. And before we get too much into it, just the same thing, Sullivan, that happened to a few of the other students, happened to you, where you have the name or the appendix of the file name here. As you can see, I'm highlighting uh, after the .jpeg, which confuses the computer because the computer is looking for a JPEG file and it can't find it. So it just sees this as an exec file. So what you have to do is actually put that name right here before the .jpeg. So that's the correct way to do that in there. You're going to get that like that. You can see it right away. Once I did that, you can see how the computer was able to recognize the photograph. So let's go over to your artist statement here. So it's interesting in your artist statement, you definitely talk about your experiences in this class and some of the challenges that you had and some of the things that you overcame, all of which are very important things to acknowledge and to recognize. And I almost feel like though this is something that you could include in an email or in a discussion post or something like that. When we get to your artist statement, and if you remember, there's, in fact, I even think there was a question on this that I put on the final exam or on one of the quizzes, that an artist statement should not include an apology. And I kind of feel like you're apologizing in this artist statement, which, is just, it's not the place for it. However, I do think that what you gave us in your titles here is probably a lot closer to an artist statement. I've always been passionate about basketball. It's brought me so much in life that I do not believe I will ever be able to thank the game enough. Since this assignment is meant to be about us, I do believe that basketball needed to be a part of it. So that, for me, is a great artist statement right there. And, weave all of these reflections together into one or two paragraphs, and I think you got yourself a really great artist statement. So think about that and be aware of that as you continue to work through art. And if you have any other art classes, this certainly would be helpful information for you to know as you go along. So I'm just going to take a second. I have to go in and change all of these images here, so I'm going to pause this out. Okay, we are back, and you can see how I've gone in here and changed the appendix to all of these images to just .jpeg. So let's run in and take a look at some of your images. So we've got the basketball net first, which very much goes to what you talk about in your titles there, how important basketball is to your life. I love the fact that we've got some repeating patterns of the net and the backboards and the I guess base to the structure and so forth. So really interesting image. I love the diagonals. I think it's all set up beautifully. Really well composed image, very pleasing to the eye. So it works for me. The one question I have here is you do put this image in black and white, and it looks like the rest of your images are in color. Not sure if you had read the example in the modules about kind of throwing in one black and white image amongst many color images. So I'm not necessarily sure that would be a decision that I would make to put this in black and white here. I think the rest of your project very much looks good in color, and I don't see any reason why you may not have or could not have made this a color image. I love this shot, and I almost feel like this image could have been your first image because it's kind of a self-portrait, and basically this project is about all of the things that are interesting to you. So maybe flip-flop that first and second image. So this is your first image, and it introduces you, essentially. And having the self-portrait is a perfect way to introduce you and all the things that are important to you. So put this as your opening intro photo. Love the shot. I think it's great. And I even think it's kind of interesting that your hat is kind of covering your eyes here, which lends a little bit of mystery to the image and, sort of makes the viewer wonder a little bit about who you are, what's important to you, and what is mysterious about this person. So really like that from that perspective. You've got some shots of different detail stuff that is important to your life. The pool pocket, your sneakers, and even this locker room shot. Kind of interesting here, the locker room shot and the pool corner shot. It looks like you used a flash on. We've talked about flash a bunch. Yeah, you flash fired in here. So I just always caution everybody about using a flash because it tends to flatten things out and makes everything kind of like it's smushed together and it's cut out. And I mean, look right here where sort of the corner of the table almost looks like it's blending in to the flat surface of the table. So I'm sorry, the bumper is blending into the flat surface. So just got to watch out on that. If any way possible you can shoot it without having your flash fire, I think that would make for a much stronger image. Love the repeating patterns you've got going on in this image, and I love the fact how it kind of goes from very colorful to lots of details and icons on there to a shot where it's more of kind of just a straightforward, simpler type of shoe. Also love how I think our eye is immediately attracted to these colorful ones, and we've talked about this semester where your eye is going to go from left to right, so we've got this nice diagonal line that takes our eye from the left to the right in the frame. This image, probably one of my favorite images of the group. I love how you've got all of the empty locker room or locker stalls except for the one that you've got the player holding up his jersey in there. I just wonder if maybe we want to crop this image in a way that gets rid of this over here, so you're just kind of ending the image just like this. I'm sorry, let me grab the crop tool. So you're just kind of ending the image right there, rather than including this extra stuff over here, which I think is just stuff that doesn't make a difference one way or the other ultimately to the photograph. You used a flash here, and I think in this instance the flash looks really good. It does flatten the scene out a little bit, but I just think ultimately it works here, and it just goes to prove that always I can kind of give you rules, but sometimes the most creative and the best shots are ones where those rules are broken, and I think this is probably an instance where that's the case. Kind of a detail shot is this is your room, and we've especially got the door plate, I guess, and the room out of focus in the background. I think this image may be just a little bit dark. We could just lighten that up a little bit. Lots of different ways we can lighten it up, but I think something like that is a little bit more interesting. I don't know what was available to you in this scenery here, but maybe something that could relate to this. So, something very personal, your name on the door, something that is distinctly you on the door that kind of mirrors this. It's kind of interesting. I guess it was on your 7th shot here. You've got sort of all these details like the basketball jerseys and, all kinds of stuff that signifies basketball there. Would have been neat to maybe have something like that juxtaposed against this or on the other side of this to kind of compare and play off the two to make it maybe just a little bit more personal, because without it, we don't really know that this is your room or what your home is for the season. And then something that certainly speaks to your involvement with basketball here. I kind of like the reflection in the glass here, and I'm almost wondering if we even zoom in a little bit and kind of punch the contrast up in this image a little bit, if those reflections in there, oh, that's not working. I'll get rid of that. But, you know, I like the play of the reflections on the floor along with this. And perhaps even, I don't know whether you could have found an angle where your own reflection was being visible in this glass here. Perhaps that would have been something that would have just added another dimension to this whole thing. And then to finish out here, we've got the image of the flower. Again, I can see like where this would be personally appealing to you and visually attractive to you, although I feel like it seems very out of character to the rest of the project. And the one thing that you know, we've got to point out the obvious here, this image is like really out of focus. So as we're talking about from a technical perspective, when you have something that has you know, weaknesses like this, I just absolutely would highly recommend you edit it out of the project. And we look at this. Wow, an exposure of 1/6 of a second. That's going to be a super slow exposure, and unless your camera is on a tripod, I really doubt you're going to be able to get an image that's in focus, because you're going to have a little bit of blurring from the handshake of you that is natural for anybody when they're taking a photograph. So as I have emphasized time and time again throughout the semester, you've really got to get shutter settings that are above 1/60th, not 1/6, 1/60th of a second, to eliminate that blurring from the camera shake. And clearly to me that's what's going on here in this image. So lots of good images here, Sullivan. Lots of growth throughout the semester. I'm glad that you've made so many strides as we've gone along. I mean, that's the thing that we're always looking for. Lots of people come into this class and are good photographers on day one, and perhaps they don't grow that much through the semester. What you've demonstrated for me is a lot of growth through the semester, and that really is an important part of this whole process. Probably still a little ways to go, especially on the technical end of things, and on the concept. I think we need to tie these things together in a little bit tighter way. I've got some shots in here that seem a little bit out of character with the rest of the body of the work. But as a whole, I'm happy with where you're at, and I'm really glad that you've pushed your way through some challenges here. And that's really, in the end, all I can expect from everybody in the class. So good wishes on this, and look forward to taking some photos of you during the season. So make sure you guys are ready to go. Have a good one.